Stephanie Cole is equally at home on stage or on television. We talked in the kitchen of our house near Bath with a rather busy road outside. She told me about how she had started at the Bristol Old Vic Theatre School.
I was 15 when I auditioned for the Vic School, and in those days it was run by a wonderful guy called Duncan Ross, known as Bill Ross. Now he'd trained at the Old Vic School in London under Michel Saint-Denis, who of course in his turn had trained with Stanislavski. So it was only two removed from Stanislavski. So it was a small intake, about 15 or 16 every year, and of course there was in those days they could afford, if somebody didn't cut the mustard, then they could afford to give them the sack. Which they used to do. So I auditioned when I was about 15 and a half and got in. It would have been 57 because my birthday's in October, so I was 16 when I went and I became 17 when I was there, which was for me was wonderful. I mean, I don't know what I would have done if I and that was the only one I wanted to go to. I'd read all about all the drama schools, and I knew that, of course, at the time RADA was very much thought of as a bit of a finishing school. Do you know what I mean? Of course, you know that was a bit of a calumny that there wasn't. And because of the Vic's close connections with Saint-Denis and Stanislavski and the Old Vic in London, that's the place I wanted to go, and I was lucky enough to go. And
who was at school with you?
Patrick Stewart was the year ahead of me. Robin Phillips was the year ahead of me. In my year, there was just the only two of us who've remained in the theatre were Patricia Brake and myself. There was a big dropout rate.
But in those days, it was much easier because there was the rep system, and
oh, absolutely.
I mean, had you not when I didn't go, but had you not gone, it was possible to still start working in the theatre. Now it's not.
No, because of course you can't start as an ASM, an acting ASM, because it doesn't exist.
I mean, I know lots of people who start by walking in off the street and say, "Give us a job, mister."
Oh gosh, yes.
So after school, you went to the Old Vic.
So then I went to the Old Vic, which of course was wonderful because in the company there were people like Len Rossiter and June Jago and Joe Tewson, and then I can remember Alan Bedell coming to do something, Maggie Smith, a very young Maggie Smith, very young Eileen Atkins. So I was watching people who actually became, if they weren't already great, became great, and so it was the most amazing sort of schooling. So it was, and not only that, of course, but as you know, being an ASM was great because it meant that later in one's career, you know,
you knew
some poor
worked.
techie, you know how things work. And I used to walk for the lighting at working weekends. I used to come in on a Sunday morning with whoever was directing and walk for the lighting. So I learnt about lighting, and it was invaluable. And then I was offered a second year there, and Val May was going to take over, and beloved Nat Brenner, who then was the manager of the theatre. He was a great man of the theatre, a really great man of the theatre. And I remember going to Nat and saying, you know what, and I'd also got an offer to go to, because I'd written all my letters, to go to Lincoln. And so I went to Nat and said, what should I do? And he said, go to Lincoln and play all the parts. So there I was, aged 18, 19 at Lincoln, playing along with Penny Keith in the other company, you know, because of the double company, playing all the sort of, you know, the great big female parts.
Do you remember the boss at Lincoln, Kay Gardner? She was a real battle axe, wasn't she?
Kay Gardner was, now Kay, always encased in black, as if you remember. I maintain it was the same dress, but anyway. I don't know. I had a sort of love-hate relationship with Kay, because and in fact I actually worked with her later when she was at Watford. But I remember going in, and I don't know whether I'm sure you do remember, but on a Friday you would go up round about lunch hour, and you would queue up outside, and it was Paycall, and I remember going in and picking up my pay packet. And walking out and closing the door, and suddenly there was a stentorian, Stephanie, you see, and I went back in and she said, "You didn't say thank you." And I said, "Well, no." And she said, well, you should say thank you. I said, no, I've worked for you 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. This is what I've earned. If anybody thanks anybody, we should be thanking each other. So, which was very cheeky of me, but actually I felt it was something I felt quite strongly about. And I still do, actually, because I don't like it. I understand it because actors are in such a vulnerable position, and if they stand up for themselves, unless they have any sort of name, they might lose their job. And I think that if you've made any sort of reputation, you have a duty actually to stand up for those other people in the company.
Did she direct the Shakespeare while you were there? Because that was her annual foray. No, that was her.
Oh,
she condescended.
We did Shakespeare.
Oh, she didn't do it.
She never directed anything. In fact, I didn't even know. That's news to me that she directed.
Well, I understood that was her annual thing, that she would direct the Shakespeare.
I see.
And we did, the year I was there, we did As You Like It, and Stephen Burkoff was brought up for a special week to do Orlando.
Yeah.
And on the very, very first day of rehearsal in the Crown Hut, remember the Crown Hut?
Yes.
Very first day we were doing the rehearsal, read-through, Orlando has the first speech. So she was sort of sitting there, everybody was sitting around the horseshoe, and she said, okay, let's start. And he said, well, before we start, you've made some cuts here which render this first speech and a lot of the first act, or first scene, rather meaningless. She said, no, just read it. Well, I can't read it because it doesn't make sense, I mean, blah, blah, blah. And this went on and on, and everybody was saying,
Yeah.
And that she didn't back down on. They sort of became, they reached a sort of agreeing to differ.
A way of.
But she was a real battle axe.
Yes, she was actually. She was. In fact, when I was offered the play at Watford, the offer came from her. I can't remember who the director was, which quite surprised me actually, because I felt that because I'd stood up to her, which a lot of people didn't. That I probably was persona non grata, but actually, she greeted me with great fondness. So I mean, she really, to be fair to her, I think looking back and with all the years that have gone by since, she was a good manager. She kept theatres open and got reasonable directors.
So tell me some more stories about Lincoln.
I mean, I remember at Lincoln there being no hot water. It was all cold water. I remember going and travelling from prompt side to OP under the stage, which you sometimes had to do, down the stone steps along and up the stone steps. And I remember coming up the stone steps on the OP side and coming face to face with the most enormous bloody cockroach.
But while we were at Lincoln, we used to tour, didn't we? We used to get in a bus every night and go off to Rotherham or Scunthorpe or Loughborough. What do you remember about that?
I remember going into Scunthorpe, and I remember the first time on the coach, and as we came in, we passed this butcher's shop with, the white writing in the thing, and it said, and I don't know why this is stuck in my memory, it said Tripe Deluxe. And I thought, tripe, many things, but deluxe? I don't think so. But yes, and I do remember actually, I must have been there during the winter, because we went to Loughborough, and Kay Gardner came down and told us all to go home. This is at the beginning of the week. Go home and pack up an overnight bag, because the snow was coming in and we were going to probably have to spend the night at Loughborough. So we all duly did, and we got to Loughborough, and indeed we were snowed in for I think 2 or 3 nights. Unfortunately, the man who actually was a local dairy farmer, who also manned the lighting board at Loughborough when he'd got the cows in, he of course was snowbound, so we didn't have anybody on the lighting board. I'm not sure we even had an audience. I suppose we must have done, because we did do the show. I can't remember what show it was, but we stayed in what is now I don't know what it's called now, that huge house that the theatre was part of. And of course we were absolutely overwhelmed by the bathrooms, because all the bathrooms had a sort of different decorating thing. One of them, I remember, had tortoiseshell, for example, everywhere. Another one was all gilt. Another one was all marble.
It was a wonderful theatre.
Yes, it was actually. But I do remember about Scunthorpe. I don't know whether you remember
Yeah,
this.
I think it's
But the first time I played at Scunthorpe, I was told that on no account pull the loo chain during the show because the cold water tank was sited in those days over the auditorium. So if anybody turned on a tap or pulled the chain to the loo, all that part of the audience could hear was so one had to be terribly careful. And I do remember there was an actor called Raymond Llewellyn.
I remember. Yeah.
And dear Ray, and you remember in those days, you always, whoever played the main part did the curtain speech about what was coming the following week. And I several times did the curtain speech, but this particular occasion, it was Ray Llewellyn's turn to do the curtain speech. And he rather ill-advisedly decided to start with, well, here we are, welcome to Scunthorpe, some chap of the north, which was greeted by in total silence, except on stage, of course, by the rest of us who were, and I do actually remember doing the Cat and the Canary there. And the reason for my telling you the story about the water tank was that Anna, whatever her name was, from Sheffield, was playing the mammy in it, who was a sort of psychic, who went into a sort of trance, and there was no such thing as PC in those days, so she was blacked up, and she went into this trance and she had to say something like, tell me the name, and someone backstage pulled the loo chain and all we heard was that sort of thing. And I also remember actually at Lincoln, you remember the fireman at Lincoln? Do you remember? He was quite often around. I don't quite know why. I don't think he was part of the theatre, but he was quite often around. And I do remember on one occasion, just occasionally, if you had a play out, it meant, and you just had a week where you weren't performing, although you were rehearsing, that you could actually go and see the other company. And that meant that actually sometimes you went between companies, so actually you all actually did work together at certain times anyway. And I do remember going to see, it was some sort of drawing room comedy where there were French windows at the back, and I do remember the utter delight that I had when I suddenly saw in the middle of this scene that was going on stage the theatre fireman crossing across the French windows, because presumably he couldn't get behind the psych and didn't realise that he could be seen. It added a great deal, I have to say, to the performance.